Hey Tony, it's Friday, and I'm in a different location because Justice isn't feeling well, is in the front room, and unfortunately in our living room we have two lights out on our big light, so it's a little darker in here, so it's going to be a little harder to see, and I'm sorry for that. So first off to answer your question, I guess second off to answer your question of the week, I don't know enough about your camera to be able to give you any information, but if you let Taylor and I know some more of the specifics about it, we might be able to help you with that. Mostly Taylor, to be fair. So what I want to talk about this week is in part because there's a great book I've been reading lately. I have it right here because I'm going to be reading it tonight. It's called, so I can get a good view on that. It's called The Storm Before the Storm, the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic. So, as you know, Tony, I'm a huge fan of ancient Rome. I've always been fascinated by it. I love learning about it. And I'm really excited to, this book has been excellent so far. It sets the stage for my personal favorite part of Roman history, which is the late Republic, the end of the Republic. And this is basically, as it says, the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic. And it got me thinking about a theory that I've been a firm believer in for years. It's called the social cycle theory. You've probably heard me talk about the social cycle theory before. But to give you a little bit of a gist, a very small gist of it, it's that society is not in a constant state of progression. Instead, history is a cycle, and it repeats itself. It's the old phrase, history repeats itself unless you pay attention. Or, sorry, those who don't pay attention to history are doomed to repeat it. Well, I'm a firm believer that even if you do pay attention to history, history tends to repeat itself. There have been countless examples throughout history that have done that. And kind of the main theory of thought on what the social cycle theory is a golden age followed by a dark age. And I think it's a relatively fair assessment. Now, it's a very simplistic assessment, but I do feel that historically there's a constant state of there's 1,000 years of glory, and then there's 500 years of terribleness. The best example is obviously the end of the Roman Republic, or the fall of the Western Roman Empire led straight to the Dark Ages. But kind of the beginning of early European history turns to the plague, and that's that Dark Age. You have the rise of empires like the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but then you also have the Mini Ice Age, which factored in the deluge, which just completely destroyed the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And history just keeps going and going and going in a constant circle. And what The Storm Before the Storm is trying to draw parallels to is today's America. Now, myself and many other people who enjoy Roman history and just enjoy history in general have oftentimes drawn parallels to the Roman Republic, or even just Rome itself, to our republic here in America. And the way the book sets the stage is it takes place from the years of 146 BC to 78 BC. Now, for some context, Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. So that's when the Roman Empire started to form under Augustus. So this takes place 30 plus years before the assassination of Caesar, which kind of leads you to some interesting communication, some interesting places. Now, at this point in the Roman Republic, at the year of 146 BC, the Roman Republic hit its greatest amount of territory, its greatest amount of glory, because they just won the Third Punic War in Carthage, and it was the golden, quote-unquote, golden age of the Roman Republic. That was a very short golden age, though, because it only lasted about, the golden age only lasted about 20 years or so, if that. Actually, it's probably only about 10 years, because as soon as Rome won that final victory in Carthage, a lot of the cracks started to form in the entire republic itself. The primary one that I'll draw some parallels to today in America is there were a number of things that are going to sound pretty close to home. For one, there was incredible income inequality. You had about 50 landowners who owned basically everything, and thousands of Romans, hundreds of thousands of Romans who didn't own any property and were basically tenant farmers to those people who are very rich. Sound a little familiar? When we live in a world where 8 people control more money than like 45% of the world, there's that issue. So there's that part. And I don't think those numbers were exact, but it's something similar to that. So you have that. You have popular uprisings in which people were tired of basically the old way of doing things. And so populist politicians started to come into office, which also sounds very familiar. And the one that I find most troubling, but most prescient, is the fact that a lot of the old Roman ways, Roman morals, and things like that were chipped away, essentially one at a time. Roman institutions were chipped away to come to make these new ones. One of the main ones, like one of the big things about the Roman Republic, was the cursus honorum, which essentially was their ladder of political office, in which you start at the bottom, then make your way up to consul, essentially the Roman president. And they started to chip away at some of the requirements. Like one of the requirements in there was you had to go through that whole process, and you weren't able to even start running for political office till you were about 30 years old after you'd done 10 years within the militaries. I think what it was, I might be a little off on those numbers, but the point still stands. But a lot of those Roman morals, Roman traditions, and Roman institutions started to get chipped away. And we're starting to see that now here, in which we have institutions that are getting chipped away, like, for one, that the government should function. Now, obviously, the government, by the time I made this video, the government was reopened a few hours ago, at least for 3 weeks. But you had that. Like, in America today, we have the press that's starting to get chipped away at, the freedoms of speech in some regards. You had the very thought that you had to at least have some political office is starting to get chipped away. The fact that no one is above the law is starting to get chipped away. And these things all led to the eventual collapse of the Roman Republic. And it's really interesting to read the book and draw parallels from there to today. Now, back in about 2012, I actually set up an analysis of the fall of the Roman Republic into the Empire and some of the processes that America was going through for a school project that I scored highly on. Because of course I did, because it's ancient Rome. But even 2012 I started to see the beginnings, but here in 2019, 7 years later, I see a lot more of it now, and I see a lot more of our institutions that are getting chipped away. And it just leads me to a very interesting thought of where I've thought we've been at the fall of the Republic is roughly where this book takes place, in which the Republic hasn't fallen to empire yet, but it was on its path. Because I figured the golden age of America was essentially right after World War II. And the golden age there was right after the Third Punic War. And as those things kind of get chipped away, fall apart, something new stands up, and I'm starting to see some parallels that I'm not too okay with. So Tony, my question for you is, what do you think of the social cycle theory? Do you believe history repeats itself? Tony, I'll see you on Tuesday. Later, bro.
Also, make sure you let us know about that camera.
Yep, definitely. See you, Tony.